One.
Estamos en Génesis capítulo 31.
Jacob secretly leaves. Strife between Jacob and Laban, and God protects Jacob.
Jacob se va en secreto, contienda entre Jacob y Labán. Dios protege a Jacob.
We saw in chapter 30 that Jacob prospered as he grew in wealth, and Laban decreased.
Vemos en el capítulo 30 que Jacob prosperó a medida que crecía en riqueza, Labán disminuía.
In chapter 30, verses 41 through 43,
En capítulo 30, verso 41 al 43,
and it came to pass whensoever the stronger cattle did conceive, that Jacob laid the rods before the eyes of the cattle in the gutters, that they might conceive among the rods. But when the cattle were feeble, he put them not in. So the feebler were Laban's, and the stronger Jacob's. And the man increased exceedingly, and had much cattle, and maidservants, and men servants, and camels, and donkeys.
41 al 43. Y sucedía que cuantas veces se hallaban en celo las ovejas más fuertes, Jacob ponía las varas delante de las ovejas en los abrevaderos para que concibiesen a la vista de las varas. Pero cuando venían las ovejas más débiles, no las ponía. Así eran las más débiles para Labán y las más fuertes para Jacob. Y se enriqueció el varón muchísimo y tuvo muchas ovejas y siervas y siervos y camellos y asnos.
This led to conflict between Jacob and Laban.
Esto llevó al conflicto entre Jacob y Labán.
Laban's sons are angry that Jacob is gaining and their father is losing wealth. Chapter 31, verse 1.
Los hijos de Labán están enojados porque Jacob está ganando y su padre está perdiendo riqueza. Génesis capítulo 31, verso 1.
And he heard the words of Laban's sons, saying, Jacob hath taken away all that was our father's, and of that which was our father's hath he gotten all his glory.
Capítulo 31, verso 1. Y oía Jacob las palabras de los hijos de Labán, que decían, Jacob ha tomado todo lo que era de nuestro padre, y de lo que era de nuestro padre ha adquirido toda esta riqueza.
As Laban loses his wealth, his sons lose their inheritance. That is, there is less for them to inherit.
Cuando Labán pierde su riqueza, sus hijos pierden su herencia, es decir, tienen menos cosas que heredar.
It is interesting that they say that Jacob had gotten his glory from their father's possessions. Laban had gained through Jacob being there. Chapter 30 and verse 27.
Es interesante que digan que Jacob obtuvo su gloria de las posesiones de su padre. Labán había ganado gracias a que Jacob estaba ahí. Génesis capítulo 30, versículo 27.
In chapter 30 and verse 27, we read, And Laban said unto him, I pray thee, if I have found favor in thine eyes, tarry, for I have learned by experience that the Lord hath blessed me for thy sake.
Capítulo 30, verso 27 leemos, y Labán le respondió, halle yo ahora gracia en tus ojos, y quédate experimentado que Jehová me ha bendecido por tu causa.
Many people are like this. They like having someone around when it benefits them, but if they are not doing well and the other person is, then they become angry about it.
Mucha gente es así, les gusta tener a alguien cerca cuando les beneficia, pero si a ellos no les va bien y la otra persona sí, entonces se enojan.
Jacob sees the writing on the wall, Genesis 31 and verse 2, And God tells Jacob to return home and promises to be with him, Genesis 31 and verse 3.
Jacob ve la escritura en la pared, Génesis capítulo 31, verso 2. Dios le dice a Jacob que regrese a casa y le promete estar con él, Génesis capítulo 31, verso 3.
In verses 2 and 3, we read, And Jacob beheld the countenance of Laban, and behold, it was not toward him as before. And the Lord said unto Jacob, Return unto the land of thy fathers, and to thy kindred, and I will be with thee.
Capítulo 31, versos 2 y 3. Miraba también Jacob el semblante de Labán y veía que no era para con él como había sido antes. También Jehová dijo a Jacob, vuélvete a la tierra de tus padres y a tu parentela y yo estaré contigo.
Jacob speaks with Leah and Rachel about the situation, told them that their father was no longer happy with him, and tells them that God has told him to return home. Genesis 31, verses 4 through 16.
Jacob habla con Lea y Raquel sobre la situación. Les dijo que su padre ya no estaba contento con él. Les dice que Dios le ha dicho que regrese a casa. Génesis capítulo 31, verso 4 al 16.
We're not going to read that entire section, but I do want us to read a little bit from there.
No vamos a leer todo, pero vamos a leer unos cuantos versos.
Beginning there in verse 4, And Jacob sent and called Rachel and Leah to the field unto his flock, and said unto them, I see your father's countenance, that it is not toward me as before, but the God of my father hath been with me. And ye know that with all my power I have served your father, and your father hath deceived me, and changed my wages 10 times, that God suffered him not to hurt me. If he said thus, the speckled shall be thy wages, then all the cattle were speckled, and if he said thus, the ring straked shall be thy hire, then bear all the cattle the ring straked. Thus God hath taken away the cattle of your father and given them to me.
Verso 4 al 9. Envió pues Jacob y llamó a Raquel y a Lea al campo donde estaban sus ovejas. Y les dijo, veo que el semblante de vuestro padre no es para conmigo como era antes, mas el Dios de mi padre ha estado conmigo. Vosotros sabéis que con todas mis fuerzas he servido a vuestro padre, y vuestro padre me ha engañado y me ha cambiado el salario 10 veces, pero Dios no le ha permitido que me hiciese mal. Si él decía así, los pintados serán tu salario, entonces todas las ovejas parían pintados. Y si decía así, los listados serán tu salario, entonces todas las ovejas parían listados. Así quitó Dios el ganado de vuestro padre y me lo dio a mí.
God has blessed him, giving the increase to him, and taking from Laban.
Dios lo bendijo dándole el aumento y quitándole a Labán.
Note that Laban had deceived Jacob, changing his wages 10 times, verse 7.
Note que Labán había engañado a Jacob cambiando su salario 10 veces, verso 7.
And of course, we read that.
Ya leímos.
Apparently, at least in their thoughts, their father was not too favorable with them either. That's Rachel and Leah, of course.
Aparentemente, al menos en sus pensamientos, su padre tampoco era demasiado favorable con ellos. Verso 14 y 16.
And I didn't mention it, but verses 14 through 16. We read there, And Rachel and Leah answered and said unto him, Is there yet any portion or inheritance for us in our father's house? Are we not counted of him strangers? For he hath sold us and hath quite devoured also our money, and all the riches which God hath taken from our father, that is ours, and our children's. Now then, whatsoever God hath said unto thee, do.
Verso 14 al 16. Respondieron Raquel y Lea y le dijeron, ¿tenemos acaso parte o heredad en la casa de nuestro padre? No nos tiene ya como por extrañas, pues que nos vendió y aún se ha comido del todo nuestro precio. porque toda la riqueza que Dios ha quitado a nuestro padre nuestra es, y de nuestros hijos. Ahora pues haz todo lo que Dios te ha dicho.
Jacob secretly departs, taking his family and possessions with him, 17 through 24.
Jacob parte en secreto llevándose consigo a su familia y sus posesiones. Verso 17 al 24.
Then Jacob rose up and set his sons and his wives upon camels, and he carried away all his cattle and all his goods which he had gotten, the cattle of his getting, which he had gotten in Paddan Aram, for to go to Isaac his father in the land of Canaan. And Laban went to shear his sheep, and Rachel had stolen the images that were her father's. And Jacob stole away unawares to Laban the Syrian, in that he told him not that he fled. So he fled with all that he had, and he rose up and passed over the river, and set his face toward the Mount Gilead. And it was told Laban on the third day that Jacob was fled. And he took his brethren with him and pursued after him 7 days' journey, and they overtook him in the Mount Gilead. And God came to Laban the Syrian in a dream by night, and said unto him, Take heed that thou speak not to Jacob either good or bad.
Verso 17 al 24. Entonces se levantó Jacob y subió sus hijos y sus mujeres sobre los camellos, y puso en camino todo su ganado y todo cuanto había adquirido, el ganado de su ganancia que había obtenido en Padam Aram, para volverse a Isaac su padre en la tierra de Canaán. Pero Labán había ido a trasquilar sus ovejas, y Raquel hurtó los ídolos de su padre. Y Jacob engañó a Labán arameo, no haciéndole saber que se iba. Huyó pues con todo lo que tenía, y se levantó y pasó el Eufrates, y se dirigió al monte de Galaad. Y al tercer día fue dicho a Labán que Jacob había huido. Entonces Labán tomó a sus parientes consigo, y fue tras Jacob camino de 7 días, y le alcanzó en el monte de Galaad. Y vino Dios a Labán arameo en sueños aquella noche, y le dijo, guárdate que no hables a Jacob descomedidamente.
Laban learns of this and is angry. He chases after Jacob, and God, in a dream, warns Laban not to harm Jacob.
Labán se entera de esto y se enoja. Él persigue a Jacob. Dios en un sueño advierte a Labán que no haga daño a Jacob.
When Laban catches up with Jacob, he tells him that he could hurt him, but God has warned him not to. Verses 25 through 35.
Cuando Labán alcanza a Jacob, le dice que podría lastimarlo, pero que Dios le ha advertido que no lo haga. Verso 25 al 35.
And again, we're not going to read this entire section, but I do want to read a little bit of it. So, notice there, beginning in verse 25. Then Laban overtook Jacob. Now Jacob had pitched his tent in the mount, and Laban with his brethren pitched in the mount of Gilead. And Laban said to Jacob, What hast thou done, that thou hast stolen away unawares to me, and carried away my daughters as captives, taken with the sword? Wherefore didst thou flee away secretly, and steal away from me, and didst not tell me, that I might have sent thee away with mirth, and with songs, with tabret, and with harp, and hast not suffered me to kiss my sons and my daughters? Thou hast now done foolishly in so doing. Verse 29, It is in the power of my hand to do you hurt. But the God of your father spake unto me yesternight, saying, Take thou heed that thou speak not to Jacob either good or bad.
25 to 30.
25 through 29.
Okay, 25 al 29. Alcanzó pues Labán a Jacob, y éste había fijado su tienda en el monte, y Labán acampó con sus parientes en el monte de Galaad. Y dijo Labán a Jacob, ¿qué has hecho que me engañaste y has traído a mis hijas como prisioneras de guerra? ¿Por qué te escondiste para oír y me engañaste y no me lo hiciste saber para que yo te despidiera con alegría y con cantares, con tamborín y arpa? Pues ni aún me dejaste besar a mis hijos y mis hijas, ahora locamente has hecho. Poder hay en mi mano para haceros mal, mas el Dios de tu padre me habló anoche diciendo, guárdate que no hables a Jacob descomedidamente.
Laban says that all that Jacob has, his family and possessions, are Laban's. He says Jacob has done wrong in this, accuses him of stealing his images.
Labán dice que todo lo que Jacob tiene, su familia y posesiones, es de Labán. Dice que Jacob ha hecho mal en esto, lo acusa de robar sus imágenes.
Notice in verse 30, and now though thou wouldest needs be gone, because thou sore longest after thy father's house, yet wherefore hast thou stolen my gods?
Noten el verso 30. Y ya que te ibas, ¿por qué tenías deseo de la casa de tu padre? ¿Por qué me hurtaste mis dioses?
It was Rachel who had stolen them, and Jacob, unaware of this, says, whoever has them will die. And Rachel cunningly hides them.
Era Raquel quien nos había robado y Jacob, sin saberlo, dice, quien los tenga morirá. Raquel los esconde astutamente.
There is some question by some as to what these images are. Adam Clarke gives some thought, though Strong's does not support Clarke's thoughts.
Algunos se preguntan qué son estas imágenes. Adam Clarke reflexiona un poco, aunque Strong's no respalda los pensamientos de Clarke.
Strong's says that the Hebrew word has reference to idols. These are his gods, which he says there in verse 30.
Strong dice que la palabra hebrea hace referencia a ídolos. Estos son sus dioses.
And in verse 30 there.
Está en el verso 30.
This does not show Rachel in a good light. Why did she take them? Was it to get back at her father, or was Rachel into idolatry? We are not told.
Esto no muestra a Raquel con buenos ojos. ¿Por qué los tomó? ¿Fue vengarse de su padre o Raquel estaba en idolatría? No se nos dice.
After Laban has searched everywhere, except, of course, where Rachel had hidden them, Jacob rebukes Laban for his conduct, verses 36 through 42.
Después de que Labán ha buscado por todas partes, excepto por supuesto donde Raquel los había escondido, Jacob reprende a Labán por su conducta, verso 36 al 42.
And Jacob was wroth and chode with Laban, and Jacob answered and said to Laban, what is my trespass? What is my sin that thou hast so hotly pursued after me? Whereas thou hast searched all my stuff, what hast thou found of all thy household stuff? Set it here before my brethren and thy brethren, that they may judge betwixt us both. This 20 years have I been with thee. Thy ewes and thy she goats have not cast their young, and the rams of thy flock have I not eaten. That which was torn of beast I brought unto thee, I bear the loss of it of my hand, didst thou require it, whether stolen by day or stolen by night. Thus I was in the day, the drought consumed me, and the frost by night, and my sleep departed from mine eyes. Thus have I been 20 years in thy house. I served thee 14 years for thy 2 daughters, and 6 years for thy cattle. And thou hast changed my wages 10 times. Except the God of my father, the God of Abraham, and the fear of Isaac had been with me, surely thou hast sent me away now empty. God hath seen mine affliction and the labor of my hands, and rebuked thee yesternight.
Verso 36 al 42. Entonces Jacob se enojó y riñó con Labán, y respondió Jacob y dijo a Labán: ¿Qué transgresión es la mía? ¿Cuál es mi pecado para que con tanto ardor hayas venido en mi persecución? Pues, ¿qué has buscado en todas mis cosas? ¿Qué has hallado de todos los enseres de tu casa? Ponlo aquí delante de mis hermanos y de los tuyos, y juzguen entre nosotros. Estos 20 años he estado contigo, tus ovejas y tus cabras nunca abortaron, ni yo comí carnero de tus ovejas. Nunca te traje lo arrebatado por las fieras, yo pagaba el daño. Lo hurtado así de día como de noche, a mí me lo cobraba. De día me consumía el calor, y de noche la helada, y el sueño huía de mis ojos. Así he estado 20 años en tu casa, 14 años te serví por tus 2 hijas, y 6 años por tu ganado, y has cambiado mi salario 10 veces. Si el Dios de mi padre, Dios de Abraham y temor de Isaac, no estuviera conmigo, de cierto me enviarías ahora con las manos vacías, pero Dios vio mi aflicción y el trabajo de mis manos, y te reprendió anoche.
Jacob points out that had it not been for God and Laban's fear of Isaac, Laban would have taken all that Jacob had and sent him away empty handed.
Jacob señala que si no hubiera sido por Dios y el temor de Labán a Isaac, Labán habría tomado todo lo que Jacob tenía y lo habría despedido con las manos vacías.
Laban tells Jacob that all that is his belongs to Laban, verses 43 through 55.
Labán le dice a Jacob que todo lo que es suyo le pertenece a Labán. Verso 43 al 55. Hacen las paces y Labán regresa a casa.
And they make peace, and Laban returns home. We're not going to read through that whole section. You can read it, but do note those two things, that they do make peace and then depart. Does anyone have any questions or comments?
¿Alguna pregunta o comentario?
Like you, oh, sorry. I was going to say, there were Jacob, or not Jacob, but when God talks Laban, not saying anything to him, either good or bad.
Yeah.
He goes on and says it anyway, but he even admits that God told him not to.
Yeah, and
that tells you a little bit of something Laban, doesn't it?
Kind of stupid. But I really want to go back, and I didn't, but I want to go back and look at exactly the wording there in the original, because it does seem strange, because he says, don't say anything to him, good or bad.
Yeah.
Well, I might take that pretty plain and say, I'm going home. I'm not going to speak to this man.
I was wondering if
it literally translates into that.
I was wondering if God was telling him, don't mess with him, just call him back.
Yeah, I don't know, and again, that might be something to really look at and study the original on that, because I wonder if what essentially is being said is, watch your step, be careful, you know, you don't want to try to hurt him, because, well, don't hurt him or else, but either way, Laban better watch his step, and indeed, he says, within my power to hurt you, to do, I guess essentially say to kill you, but God said don't. I don't know if that helps you out any bit.
Yeah, I just wondered about why he did that.
I don't know. Like I said, if he literally said don't speak to him good or bad, I'd just turn around and gone home and said, you know what? Best wishes.
But then people like that today, though, when they read God's word, what they need to do, whether it's salvation, worship, or daily living, God said, well, it's okay. I'm going to do whatever. Basically the same thing.
Oh, yeah. John, you were.
Sounds like to me, Laban was saying one thing, then he turns around and says, well, I could kill you because you did all this, but I wanted to throw you a party and give it all to you. He kind of backtracks everything he says.
Well, and I wonder if and I again, I didn't come across anything in my studies to say this, But I wonder if what he was getting at in there, and this is just me wondering, was he saying that because it was his, he was saying it was his, and he clearly says that, and that because he had taken it, that in their society and their custom, that it was in his power to kill him for this. Now, again, that's speculation. I didn't come across anything that said that, so I don't know.
But then,
But you know, Laban isn't the most upstanding, honest
yeah,
person.
he just gave him his daughters. Then he worked for his daughters. Then he worked for the cattle. And then he turned around and says, well, I could have killed you, could have took it. It's like, okay,
Yeah.
but it technically is anyways.
Yeah, well, as we went through all of that over the last couple 3 weeks, you know, it's very clear, and you go back to when Abraham sent his servant to didn't get send her to get Rebecca by name, but sent to get Isaac a wife. You see Laban's behavior that clearly he seems really interested in the money. He's not so much interested in this is family and this is my sister, you know, and all that. It's money, it seems to me, that he's interested in, and and then you see he tricks, you know, stop, he says 10 times. Jacob says 10 times, but stop and think about it. He worked for Rachel, and then when it came time to give Rachel to him, he says, "Oh, I can't give Rachel to him first because she's the oldest, and you don't do that in our country." So he gives Leah to him, and then he works another 7 years, and then in the with the animals, he takes the animals and he actually gives them to his sons that are supposed to be Jacob, and Laban's sons take them over here, and so he's even withholding those at least for a time in the process. Jim, did you have something?
I think we can eliminate any thought that Rachel was worshiping idols
Why would you say that, Jim?
because she sat on them.
She certainly didn't seem to have too much of a respect, so that's the
She
thought.
didn't have any respect for them. She was getting it away from her father. She was getting back at her father.
That's an interesting thought, Jim. That's that's certainly if she was into idolatry, she doesn't show much respect for her idols.
No.
But
No, she was not into idolatry.
so that's
Could have been very big for her to sit on.
well. Clark again. Adam Clark comes up with several ideas, or comes up with and he explains it. You can go look it up. What he says, but he basically he says it was he argues two or three different things the way it sounds to me like, but it was these little plates or disc or something, and he even makes an argument, quotes somebody, I don't know who it is, that something about cutting somebody's head off and putting it here, and then putting a piece under the tongue, and it would talk to them, or at least I guess they supposed it would talk to them, and all. He goes through a lot of stuff, but and then ultimately comes to the idea that it's not um, God. You know, but again, I mean, the King James explicitly in verse 30 says that he said, "My gods." And then if you look at the Hebrew word again, Strong's says, in fact, that it has reference to gods, to idols.
So say the household gods, those are household gods, they would be enormously big.
Yeah.
But, you know, she hit them in the saddle or in the.
And the camels.
You ever
thing.
see one of those camels, what they would.
I've seen
furniture?
TV.
It was a pretty good size thing. So it would have been hard. Put them over there, put it on there, blanket on it or something.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So
That's what I would have done.
interesting. Hermanos, ladies. Questions? Bill, you quiet over there? Any questions for you? I'm trying to make sure everybody has a chance.
No,
Well, in that case, then we're going to go ahead and conclude, and I encourage you to study chapter 32 for next week.